It's all good until
A participant has joined the meeting.
it's all good until you try to clean their mustache. They have peanut butter all over their mustache. But... All right. One more.
I'm going to be dog sitting this weekend.
All of you are talking about dogs, which is my favorite. Awesome.
It's cute.
I like it. I have people stay with my dogs too because I'm fancy like that. I always feel like it's totally fancy to have somebody dog sit and like they hang out in my house and drink wine and play with the dogs, and I pay them to do it. So it's really, really awesome. I love it. But my dogs are very spoiled, like completely spoiled. Just ridiculous. Okay, so I got a lot of dog comments. Now I'm happy and ready to get going. All right. So I am about to move this behind, and I'd like to get my chat room open, but I don't know how exactly. So take me a second and figure it out. I love that you guys get to see me mess around there. Okay. Oh yeah, Lisa already told me about that. Okay, so here we go. We're going to talk today about high stakes tests because specifically I want the rest of the semester to be couched in the idea of what a high stakes test is and that we are very clear about what formal assessments are and informal assessments are and specifically how they're run in the United States and in Texas, but also how it compares to the world. Because we often hear that the United States is way below everybody else. Our kids aren't doing as well. There's these huge problems. And we're going to look at some data to see if that's actually true. And I'd like for you guys to see firsthand, is that actually true? And as you get into Module 2, I have put a little bit of data up there. I'm going to pull some of it today if we get to it. Because the goal is not that I change your mind. It's that you recognize how you want to be able to speak to these things because the test is not going away, whether we're online or whether we're face-to-face. This big high-stakes test that kids have, or your certification exams, which are high-stakes as well, aren't going away. And they have big repercussions for kids, for teachers, for principals, for schools, for the housing market, and for you specifically. You guys can have all A's in every class. You can be an amazing student. You can be one of our premier Capilify amazingness. And still, if you haven't passed your content exams, you don't go on to be a teacher. Now, that's really important to understand, not only because it's scary, but because it should showcase to you a little bit that a test does not necessarily mean you're going to be a great teacher, and a test does not necessarily mean that a student is going to be an awful student. They might be a great student getting awful test scores that work really hard and try really hard and do what you ask them to do. And then that can be really disappointing. But I want you to be able to talk about it in ways that separate the kid, the whole kid, from the test score. Because a test score is a 1 minute, at that time, kind of chosen glance at what somebody might know. Just because you don't pass the math section doesn't mean you don't know how to do math. Nor does it mean if you don't remember what a linear regression is, that you shouldn't be a teacher of 4th grade. So kind of as we're talking about the kid stuff, think about it also in terms of your certification tests, because here in Texas, we love, love, love certification tests. We like you to pay for them. We like for Pearson to make a lot of money. And I'm going to talk about money and how it's sort of couched inside of our learning communities. Money has been it is such a big problem. And our Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, doesn't quite understand what it is that's happening and why it's such a problem. So we'll go with that. All right. So first of all, I'm going to ask you guys to kind of take a minute, and you're welcome to talk with each other if you can. I wish I could push you into rooms. I would totally push you into rooms. It will not normally be me talking and just doing it one at a time. But I would like for you to take maybe a minute or two, and on a piece of paper, I want you to think about why high stakes tests might be problematic. And if you don't really know, that's okay. You can think about it in terms of yourself. So for you, why is the high stakes certification test a problem? Like, why are you worried about it? And what would it mean? Then you can translate that into what it means for teachers in schools, how curriculum might change, children change. So what are some of the major problems that a high stakes assessment creates in the classroom? So I'm actually going to give you about 2 minutes. 2 minutes to do that on your own paper, on your little notes on the side, if you've printed out the PowerPoint, or you make a note page and then kind of type in the date and get started. That's what I do. And that's how, as I'm talking to you guys, I have my notebook. And what I'll do is I write down things that we talked about, and then that can go into your test. So that might be how that happens, is like, now I'm going to ask you a question about problems associated with high stakes testing because we talked about it. All right, take a second. And I'm going to go grab a pen. I have everything else but no pen. I'll be right back. You take 2 minutes. Go. Oops, I think I sent the link to, or I sent the question to one person and not everyone. Now we got it. So anybody have some ideas? Just unmute your mic and then mute it again when you're done. What do you think? What are some of the issues or problems that might be apparent?
Okay, so not everyone does well in taking tests. Some people may have a weakness on exams but have strengths in other areas.
Yeah, I like what you said, Giovanna, and I think that leads to this idea of anxiety, right? Like you're not good at it, and you actually develop, even when you're little, a test anxiety as a result of it. The not good turns into anxiety about performing. Yeah, Jacqueline says test anxiety. Perfect example. Test anxiety is absolutely an example. You'll even see children. You'll see children who are sick. Like they'll actually come in and say that their stomach hurts or they're like nauseous. They don't want to come to school. They don't feel good. You know, that normal, I don't feel good. And it's stress induced. I've seen kids cry because they don't want to take a test. I've had special needs kids who just literally outright refuse, like throwing chairs. And with a high stakes test and that anxiety that comes, it's not just the kids. What about the teachers?
I was thinking also like a feeling of failure. So that's another like emotion you can feel. Also seeing on Fridays when I was smaller, I remembered Fridays were fun, but that's testing days for our kids and for teachers. So you get there on a Friday and it's just not fun. Like you've led all this week of all this fun learning, and then they sit and look at this paper and it's just all of a sudden not so fun.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And learning should be engaging. It should, somebody wrote about flow, and it absolutely should feel like, especially when you're little, like it should feel like it's fun to learn things, my brain moving. So if I'm doing all these great things with spelling during the day and we're working on root words or we're working on chunking and all of that, why would I give a test on Friday that doesn't look the same as how I just taught it? Like, if we had all of these great things going on, I already know who has it and doesn't have it, but I should be giving something to the kids that allows them to show me what they know based on what we did. Not just prove to the test makers that they're able to take a test on temperature, but that all week we worked on temperature, looking outside and feeling the window and feeling the car tops or whatever, and being able to say that's how we know if something's hot. That's how we can imagine. Do you think a car is hot right now? Well, yes. Well, why do you think that? Those are the important ways that we do that. So yeah, really nice. We should be testing the way that we're teaching. And if we're teaching such that it's fun and engaging, we should be testing the same way, because that's actually where kids are going to be able to show what they know. You also kind of mentioned about the teacher, and I kind of want to come back to that. So tell me about the teacher and these high stakes tests.
I think they feel like kind of what Martha was saying, they have pressure because the student scores reflect them as a teacher, so they want their kids to do well, so it can look good on them for the school and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, it feels
I
like.
think a lot of teachers get burned out
Why?
with testing because sometimes it's just constant like worrying about the test, and then even sometimes the kids get burned out because that's all that they're doing, and then when it comes to the test, well, they don't want to do it anymore.
They're like,
you know?
I've been doing this every Friday for 187 days. Like, I'm sick of it. And even your good kids, your GT kids, start not wanting to do work because they're like, oh, it's just, star work, or it's just a silly grade. It's just homework. Yeah, everybody gets burned out. Who wants to go to a job that's awful? Nobody. I don't want to go to a job to test kids constantly. I want to make sure I'm giving kids a good education, but I don't need to test them all the time. If you came up to me and said, okay, what 5 kids are you worried about right now? Which ones do you feel are at risk? Boom, I would have them. I even have them now with you guys based on what my reading, looking at what you've written and how you wrote back. And I'm like, okay, let me watch these guys. So it's like we know immediately. Those teachers know. They don't need a test on Friday to tell them that they didn't have access to multiplication. They know. So we do a lot of reteach and retest and rework, but I don't think the tests always show that. And it makes the teacher feel less than. I've had teachers go home crying. I've cried. I've felt like I'm working so hard. Why aren't they getting it? I have, what else? I've known people who quit the job altogether, walk out. We had a teacher at our school who walked out, just literally put her pen down on her desk and walked out and went in the car and left. And then they gave her 2 weeks of like her vacation or whatever days, and then they fired her. Meanwhile, there was a sub in there for almost the rest of the year because she just, put her pen down and left. And I can't imagine that for you guys. We're most of us have a real loyalty and commitment to kids, to young people. So we want them to do good, and it just makes us feel less than. Not that we're going to leave the profession, but instead that, what are we not doing? Like, what are we not doing? And so we are going to look at some scores in a little bit. We especially need to think about what are we not doing for African-American kids? Because the truth is, out of all the scores, the kids that do the worst are African-American kiddos. Boys specifically, but girls as well. Whereas our other populations, even though they're, of course, lower than white, and we know why, but our Latinx, our Latina kiddos, as well as our any other Asian kiddos, they all do better. Everybody does better. So it's sort of confusing, and we should be asking questions. Does the test really reflect if the kids aren't actually showing what they know? If culturally it's inappropriate, or if there's something going on where we've got all these white teachers teaching kiddos and the kids aren't achieving, well, what is it? It is money, but it's not just money. All right. What else? What else do you think about these high stakes tests that might be problematic for teachers or kids?
Affects students' self-esteem sometimes. Like if they're doing okay in class and then they take an exam and they don't do so great, it's like we had said earlier, like a sense of failure. But also if everybody in the class knows that, it's like, oh, you're dumb, or
yeah, or you feel it yourself. I've studied for exams before and then not done well on them, and it makes me feel like, oh my gosh, like what don't I know? Am I not good enough? And I'll tell you, even right now, it's an interesting thing that you guys might connect with
has joined the meeting.
Is that I'm taking counseling classes at A&M to add a counselor certificate. I think there's a lot of trauma going on, and I want to know more about it. And I get free classes, so I was like, I'm going to do that. So here I am, and I'm in classes where my colleagues of years and years, professors, are teaching me, right? So I'm there as a student, but they know me as Dr. Wilson. And I feel like I can't let them down. Like, oh my God, what if I didn't do well on a test in front of my colleagues of something I'm supposed to know? And it makes me worried as if it's a high-stakes assessment rather than doing it for the love of learning. Some of you might be kind of burned out even now. You're getting towards the end of your program and you just want it to be done. And I totally get it. You do. And part of that is because you've done so much testing and so many discussion boards and so much Blackboard, and you just like want it to be done. And kids too. So much testing, so much curriculum at CBMs, so many spelling tests, and we still have kids that aren't learning. So why are we doing the same thing?
I think also Whenever like in high schools or like middle schools, elementary,
Mhm.
they waste so much time preparing them for the test, and I think that time can be used for something else, to teach them something else instead of just preparing them for that test.
Beautifully
That
said.
specific test.
Beautifully said.
Can I
Nothing to add
piggyback?
to that. Mhm.
So, and back to what she said for the test, but if the school doesn't do well on the test, you're not funded. So it goes back to the money. So, and at the end of it, you still have to test, because if that, well, I mean, I know COVID has been terrible, but it's kind of good right now because we're not preparing for tests right now. We're just trying to come up.
Yeah, we're just trying to keep them in our lure, actually, to keep them and get them. Sometimes it's finding them. I have a friend that's a counselor at Lanier, and she has 400 kids that haven't even checked in for their first day yet.
Professor Wilson, I have a question. Going on with this and the testing, is it these Cornell notes something you want us to like fill in? Because we have to turn this in tomorrow, right? The Cornell note.
Yeah, the Cornell notes are going to be due. No, I mean, you don't have to use the talk today. Most of the Cornell notes come from your readings, come out of your readings, but you're welcome to use anything for today. Yeah, you can use whatever you want to. Yeah, so I think you were saying something, you're kind of hedging on something really important, which is, we call it the narrowing of the curriculum. So what Dora Nydia, is that how you say your name? Dora Nydia?
Yeah, it's Dora Nidia, but I just prefer to go by Nidia.
Nydia. Okay, thank you. It's a really cool name. I wrote about it when I saw it, and I was like, oh, I bet she's named after a couple people. All right, Nydia. What Nydia was saying is that we narrow our curriculum. We end up teaching to the test and not teaching widely. So we teach structure to them that only involves the test. A, B, C, D answers, not much problem solving. Show me your strategies. And it's over and over again. So our curriculum that could be rainforests and polar bears gets narrowed into test taking, which nobody likes. Teachers don't like it. They don't like teaching it. And kids don't like it. And they don't like doing it. And so you end up fighting for things that actually, if you were teaching wider, teaching summarization within polar bears and Converse sneakers and monster trucks, you're going to have much more connection with the kiddos, right? Finding things that they're interested in and utilizing comprehension in the topics that they like, rather than using storybook A to Z. I'm not saying you're not using those things. I'm just saying that you have to make sure that you're connecting with the kiddos, especially those of you that are going to go into work at places like South San Antonio ISD, things like that. They need teachers who are pushing that envelope and not just teaching to the test. You'll be miserable and you'll leave the career in about 3 to 5 years because you're tired of it. It's not fun. It's not fun when all you're doing is teaching the test. Samantha says that there can be a cultural issue. There's absolutely sometimes a cultural issue. And, when I first moved to San Antonio, I thought it was so interesting because people were calling schools diverse, but really they were almost 100% Hispanic. 100% Hispanic is not diverse. So that is a cultural phenomenon happening here that leads to sort of gerrymandering of everything from votes to how much your house is worth. So a lot of times people will take jobs at South Side, but then they live North Side, and their kids go to school in North Side, and they think that North Side's better, and they pay more for their houses and all these things. As soon as they get more money, it's like move out. But the truth is, really good teachers are all over the place. And sometimes they're smooshed down by high-stakes testing. They're told not to teach widely, to teach small. But the truth is, and they become scared because the teachers next to them are doing worksheets. That's teaching small. We're just teaching about temperature, so we're going to teach about temperature. We're just teaching about reading time, so we're just going to read time. And so what ends up happening is nobody likes their job, and nobody does very well when we don't like what we're doing. When you're going to fight, and over time, you just start feeling like I could work at Target and it would be more fun. I like shopping there. It starts sounding like that's even better. And it's a sad thing because kids are the most important commodity that the United States has. They are going to save us. They're the ones who are going to be taking care of us in nursing homes. They're the ones that are going to have to save the earth. We're not doing it. So your little babies are going to have to. And that's why they're so important. It's the biggest commodity that you can ever have is that kid that's in your house or that kid that you're working with. Every one of those kids is their parents' best. It's their best kid. They're not sending you a fake one. There's no better kid at home. That is their kid for everything. And we know that just because a kid, oh, actually, Megan just said it really nicely in the chat room. Just because a student doesn't score good on a high stakes test doesn't mean that they aren't smart. Just like you, it doesn't mean you're not going to be a good teacher because you failed the social studies section. And you go back and now you know what the War of 1812 was. Knowing about the War of 1812 doesn't decide if you're a good teacher or not. I mean, I would want to see you in the class. I want to know what you're doing, and I want to help you to be better. You're all going to go in and struggle in the beginning, so a good mentor is really important. So we know that there's a cultural issue to that. We're going to look at some test scores probably next time I see you. Specifically, look at what is happening in the state of Texas in 2019, because we don't have scores for this last year, but what happened in the year before, and then we're actually going to be able to predict an outcome when they take their test this year. And you're going to see in just a second that it's probably going to be problematic for a lot of our kiddos. Everybody's going to be stressed. Okay, so some of the reasons we assess those. So we've talked about some of the problems, and I want to say the problems are not with assessment. The problems are with high stakes tests or high stakes assessment. High stakes assessment means that you are putting some really high levels of consequence if you don't do well. So for kids, high levels of consequence can be things like not moving on to the next grade or being placed. It can mean that you're in the low reading group all the time and the low math group, because for most kids, once they end up in the low group, they're in the low group for every group. If all we do is homogeneous grouping, where I group based on your test score or a score on one particular objective, you end up in the low group. You probably are in the low group for all of them. And in some ways, that pushes kids to only be the low, because the only thing they ever hear is, well, go over to the rock group. The Eagles, we're going to read Harry Potter. The rock group is reading, Sam and the Unicorn. And kids recognize really quickly. So I want you to be really clear on this. I'm going to make the statement one more time. I obviously like assessment. I teach it. I like assessment. I'm not in agreement with high stakes assessment because of all of the problems that it leads to in teachers, in our money system. Trying to decide that a test score is equivalent to money is a huge problem because the kid's still sitting there smiling, whether you get money or don't. So it hurts teachers and it can hurt children. And our job first is to do no harm. Like, our job first is to only add to their day, only add to their learning, not to teach them things that are painful and hurtful. The world will give them those things, and we will help to coddle them through that. We will help them to get the hug that they need, but our curriculum shouldn't be the ones doing that. Our curriculum should be coming in, and it should be not testing all the time. Some of you that are pretty young have gone through schools where it's all testing. Some of us that are a little older, we remember what it was like when we did units and we got to learn about tadpoles and butterflies and comprehension. So I want you to be clear. High stakes assessment are the problems. That's where the problems lie. Assessing allows us to guide our instruction. If you don't have assessment and you don't know where the kids really are, now I'm talking about good assessment. Now remember, I'm not talking about high stakes like STAR testing. I'm talking about good assessment that helps me to know what's happening in the 5 pillars of reading. What's going on with their comprehension, with their vocabulary, with their phonemic awareness, with their phonological awareness. Okay, so phonics, and then what's happening with their fluency. We need all of those things, but we have to be very aware of how we're using them because they're data for us and for the kid. If the kid doesn't know what's going on and he doesn't know why you're doing something, then he's probably going to have trouble doing it. And it becomes scary. If you were sitting with me and we were doing the exam together and I was just watching you like this, it feels really creepy. Like, I don't want you watching me because I know I'm going to go on the internet and look, or I'm going to do this. So anyway, I like assessment. You're going to like assessment. It helps you to know how to group. It helps you to know what it is that's working for your teaching, because if you have a lot of your kids who didn't understand multiplication, then it's probably your teaching. Like, it's your fault too. So let's dive back in and try it again. Oftentimes curriculums don't want you to do that. They want you to keep moving forward. Even if the kids don't have it, move forward. Be careful, be mindful, because if you move when over half of your kids are still unsure about it, you're going to end up with, as the skills grow on each other, huge problems where you look back and go, I don't even know, this kid needs everything. And now you're in a huge swamp because they need everything. Okay, it helps us to monitor the success of our own teaching. It can provide feedback to children and their parents. Parents want to see numbers. They want to see homework. You need to send stuff home. Whether they do it or not, then how you count it and all of that, that's up to you. But parents need to be involved in school as best as you can. And one way you can do that is through homework. And you'll know which parents are really in it for the win with their children and which ones are struggling and all those things. It helps you to know those things. Not that it's about the 100 in the grade book, because I actually argue you shouldn't grade homework. Okay, so provides the critical feedback. It can help you to place children in special ed or in gifted and talented. We're going to get to look at some gifted and talented tests. We test in kindergarten, and then we test again in third grade. Once a kid gets into GT, they're in. So we're going to talk about why there's more GT kids up in our north side and less in our south side, and what that might mean for schools in general. Because what we do know is gifted kids, if they have gotten into a gifted program, they're probably going to pass that STAR test, and no matter what you do, they're going to pass it. So you don't need to worry about them. What you do need to worry about them is making sure that you're meeting their needs, because often gifted kids or bright kids are just left because they already know how to do the work. And so they finish and they just sit there. Or you tell them, go and help a kid. Don't ever have other kids help other kids. When you ask a kid in your fourth grade classroom to go help a friend and they go over there to do it, what do? How do they help?
I think they just like make fun of them, right?
Could make fun of them, yeah. Like
helping them, or they just do the work for them.
There it is, Nydia. Yep.
Email the answers.
Yep. Just give them the answers, because they're not teachers. They don't know how to show them groups of threes, and they're 2 groups of 3. They don't know how to do that stuff. So they're like, oh, the answer is 6. Write it down. And sometimes they are kind of mean about it. Nydia was like, yeah, kind of. They'll say things like, oh, you again. I've heard that one. I've heard, I don't want to help her. She's dumb. When they realize who they've got to go work with. So be really mindful. You are the teacher in the classroom. You are the only one. You have been trained in pedagogy. So now your deal is you got to have something for the gifted kid or the bright kid who finishes early, and you know they've got it. They already have the idea. What can they work on so that you can work with the middles and the lows? All right. So it helps us to make decisions. It helps us to make sure that they are meeting the grade level standard. Nobody wants their third grader to be reading at a first grade level. That's not what I'm talking about. But I am saying that what they read is really important, and how you talk about it and what you do with it is really important. And of course, we need to make sure we're constantly assessing our own teaching. That's the most powerful thing. Even as you go to write surveys for me at the end of the semester, when you say things like, oh, what have I gotten? She's a dragon lady. Okay. Not so helpful for my teaching. I know. Brittany's like, what? Yeah, this was a long time ago. I used to cut them out when you did them by hand, and I would paste them in my office because some of them made me laugh. Good one, too. So I'm a dragon lady. But then I might also get one that says, you hold class. Class moves too quickly, and I wish you would slow down when you speak. That, helpful to my teaching. Dragon lady, not so helpful. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm a dragon lady to you, I don't know. But it doesn't help me change my teaching so much. But when you tell me something like, your breathing into the microphone is awkward, that helps me to be able to say, oh, okay, maybe I should watch that, or figure out how to make my sound better. But when you just tell me, and that's kids too, when you just say, hey, awesome job, they don't really know what they did that was awesome, nor do you know if they can produce it later. They produced it on that test, but will they produce it later? Is another sort of question that we have. So I'm going to start talking to you about formal assessments. So high stakes tests fall underneath a category of formal assessments. So a high stakes test, like the STAR test, like your certification test, like the TOEFL, like all of those that you're taking from Pearson, who's making millions and millions of dollars. We're going to see that in just a minute. My favorite chart of the whole semester. On it, those are formal assessments that are high stakes. We know they're high stakes because if you don't do well on them, something bad happens. It can be lots of different things, like not getting a scholarship, not going to college, or saying I have to stay at I have to start at Alamo Colleges because I didn't get a scholarship anywhere, or my counselor never helped me to even know I was available for scholarships. Those big things happen based on test scores. Okay, so a formal assessment, a high-stakes test is an example of a formal assessment. Formal assessments, in general, there's two major kinds. The first time that I would like to, I don't know what a dragon lady is, by the way, Lisa, but I'm one of them. So I'll let you know if I figure it out. Maybe I had bad breath. I don't know. Going with it. Okay, so if you've got a formal assessment, then you're probably going to have some sort of numbers. Okay, there's going to be a number that's the end. It's not a descriptive piece where it's going to describe what the kid knows or doesn't know. Instead, it's going to say, hey, how does this kid line up with all the other kids that took the test? Usually it has to do with how old they are or what grade level they're in. So in general, that's how it works. Even for you as teachers, we don't look at how old you are, but we definitely look at, you would have to finish a certain number of classes in order to take the test. You take a practice test first. If you do good enough on the practice test, then we'll send you to take the regular test. If not, sorry, wait 90 days or 30 days or something to take it again and pay for it again. So high stakes tests have something bad that happens if you don't do well on them. Whereas a spelling test, we can worry that the kids might get some low self-esteem, but ultimately nothing really bad happens. We can work through it. But on their STAR tests, there's no working through it. Like, it's over. It's done. They went on the paper. You're in, baby. Let's make it happen. So you're going to see some sort of numbers. So in general, formal assessments are built around a normalized or typical bell curve. So it looks like this. This is your bell curve, and this is the part that I want you to know. So you should be able to draw this bell curve, say on a test, and be able to locate where a kid is. So let's talk about it for a minute, and then we're going to talk about how they mess with it for a high-stakes test. Okay? So a formal assessment often uses standard deviations or bell curves. They look like this. You've seen them over and over again. You just haven't looked at the numbers as clearly. So right here, at the middle here, this is your mean. It's almost always used as a 50, meaning that 49% are higher than this group and 49% are lower. And that's how it works. So you've got half of them going up and half of them going down. The kids that are sitting right here is what they're aiming for on a test, is that most kids, around 68% of kids, are going to fall right in here in the middle. This middle part right here is 68%. Now, that's important because if a test is always wanting the majority of kids, 68%, to end up in the middle, what do they do if all the kids, when they took that test, end up over here?
They flunk them?
Yeah, well, these are high, so these have done really well. See the pluses? So these have all done really well.
Harder? When it comes.
Say it again, Brittany, or whoever just spoke.
Do they make it more challenging?
Yeah. So what ends up happening, Jennifer's right, is something that actually isn't really, it can be problematic. Now, it's not against the math rules. So I want to tell you, the math rules say we want 68% of kids to sit right here. Alicia's got it. Okay, so we want that. So if most of the kids are over here, then what I have to do is I have to take the curve and move it. Because remember, this is all about 68% of the kids being in the middle. So if they're over here, I've got to move the curve over there. So what I would do is, wish I could do this on here. It won't let me, I don't think. Draw. Let me see. Draw. So if most of them are here, but when they take this test, the test was too easy for them and they end up over here, what they're going to do is they're going to shift the curve so that 68% are still in the middle. Because remember, the goal of this is a normalized or typical bell curve. There's nothing wrong with that. So if most of the kids are scoring high, or let's say they take the test for the first time and they score over here, low, they would then take it and they would move it so that 68% are in the middle. Because the goal of a standard deviation, a normal bell curve test, this kind of formal assessment, is that 68% are in the middle. Nothing wrong with that. The problem, though, is that in order for, see if I can erase, stroke eraser, I don't know. So the problem is if I do that, if I shift it, what happens to the kids that are over here already? So now we've got kids, because we shifted it, right? We made the bell curve kind of look like this. Most of the kids were over here. So now this is our 34 and 34, right? But remember, there were already kids over here. So what happens to these guys? These are all your random kids that did even better than the 68%. So let me see if I can show it better. All right, try this again. Okay, so I want you to imagine the test is being given, and I want to use a color really badly. Okay, so the test is being given, and this is what you know is going to happen. But when the test is given, they give the new STAR test, and the kids have been out for a whole year, right? And they take it, and almost all the kids end up down here. And we've said that it's okay mathematically for us to then shift the bell curve. So we have most of the kids here. Now remember, we still had some kids who did okay. So there's still some kids here. And you would have had some kids that did poorly, right? All right, so there's our kids that did poorly. Remember, most of them are in the middle. They're all in here. So I'm going to take the curve and I shift it so that 68% are still in the middle. Okay, so now what happens to these kids? Are they still going to be high?
They don't learn anything new?
They're probably not learning anything new. Yeah, they remain being high, but remember now I've shifted it. I've shifted it down. So as I've moved, some of these kids actually fell into this now. So I used to be smart, but now I'm not as smart. Now these kids down here that were already down here, they're even worse off because now I've shifted it and I've made some of those kids fall even lower. So we have issues when we start shifting. We think about humans because humans are a little bit more complicated. Kids are complicated. It's not easy to just shift it based on a test score because if all and they do this really readily in high stakes tests because they don't know how the kids are going to score. This is why when you take the STAR test or the kids take the STAR test, it takes a month before you hear back how they did. It's because they're waiting to gather all the data to decide where that 68% is and then to move it based on that. We're going to look at it in just a second. You're going to see some real scores. Hopefully that'll help you to really understand it. But for now, on this, what you need to be able to do is to recognize that 68% of the kids fall here. A lot of schools will say that anything here down is at risk. These are your at-risk kiddos. These are the ones that, and down here, these are the ones that are really hard to even think that we're going to get them up, okay? They'll say that a kid sitting right here is still one we should worry about because they could fall either way. We don't know how they're going to score. We get a little bit scared about those. These kids over here are the ones doing the best. Usually 2 standard deviations. That's what this is. And I'll talk about that in a second. 2 standard deviations is your gifted kids. Your kids who are bright, whether they've been labeled or not. They're bright. They do the test. They always do well. 90% or better, right? They're always commended. They always do what's being asked of them. Usually they're up in here. Okay, so the mean is our 50. Actually, let's move on to the next slide so you can kind of see it. No, I kind of like this one better. All right, so the mean is going to be 50. Anything above that, 51, then we're talking that they're doing okay. They're passing, so anything up here. As soon as we look at 49, we are down here. The second way we talk about things in terms of percentages is how derivative is it from the mean? How far away from the mean is it? So we call those standard deviations. So if we divide this curve up into equal parts, and we know that 68% are here, how does a typical test that's a formal assessment work for kids, for us, for you? This is happening for you too, by the way. This is the same thing that happens on your certification tests. If all of you did well, they would shift the curve. They would move it. And if they're moving it all the time, we don't really know what the actual criteria is.
Professor, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is settled.
Oh, you're breaking up really bad, or maybe it's me.
So,
hey, Jennifer, you're breaking up really bad. Can you type it?
On the bell curve.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
It's like the negative.
Can you type it? You're coming in and out, and I totally want to describe.
I think she's.
Oh, you can hear her, Elaine?
She's just lagging.
Negative.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't really hear everything that you're saying, but I can kind of type one part. Type it over in the chat room because you're breaking up. But I think I did hear one thing saying that like
has left the meeting.
means that you're moving down from the mean in a standard way.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, I do.
Oh, you still can't hear me?
No, it's coming in and out.
I'm sorry.
No, it's not. I mean, it's just where we are. Type it in the comment or in the chat box. See if that's any better. So as we move down from the mean.
Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
So I just no. Is that bad? Like, is like because.
I got nothing. I don't hear anything. Okay, so I still can't hear you. I'm so sorry. So over here, what's bad about it is that if we're constantly moving the threshold and we're having really big consequences for it, that's where we get to have a problem. Jennifer, did you have something? Unmute. Unmute.
She is unmuted, or she was unmuted.
I didn't hear you, Jennifer.
Okay, can you hear me now or no? I'm sorry, I did that one on accident.
I think I got it.
Am I still breaking up?
No, I think I hear you. Tell me what your question is.
Okay, so my question was like this: the negative standard deviation and the positive. If the kid falls in the negative, that means that they're failing, like their like assessments. Like that's what this bell curve is, right?
Yep. So anytime that you're down here, it means that you're failing, that you are not meeting whatever the requirement is. They don't say it like that, but that's what it is. So anybody here that's right at the top of this, you teach rounding where there's a roller coaster. The problem with these that are right here is that they can go either way, and it makes people afraid. I've even heard them called bubble kids. Yeah, Jennifer, I can't hear you though. We don't hear you. I don't know why. We see you, but I don't hear you. Jennifer. We don't hear you. Jennifer. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Poor guy.
So, no, then that's why I was asking. Oh.
I hear you. Go ahead, Brittany. Okay, so as soon as kids get here, they call them bubble kids, and they'll focus major attention on them, saying, oh, well, they don't know about this particular thing. Let's make sure they do nothing but that. The problem is if you focus on one thing totally, all the other stuff starts to fall apart too. Kids are complicated critters. That means you got to keep everything going. You can't just all of a sudden start paying attention to nothing but comprehension, because then all the other stuff starts falling apart. They've got to be doing it all together at the same time. Okay, so all this means is it is one standard deviation, one standard piece from the norm, okay, from the mean. So if it's a positive standard deviation, it's good. Doesn't matter how high it is, but the higher that it goes, the better you did, okay? A lot of us that act as mathematicians or diagnosticians will say that when we see kids that are way up here, oops, I have my eraser on, that are way up here, so they take a test and they score really, really high. Not only does it probably mean giftedness, but it also means that the regular classroom is probably not meeting their needs because they are so far away from the average kid. So that kid ends up in a classroom in 4th grade or whatever grade they're in, and really they should be doing 5th grade math because way up here, where only about 2% of the kids are, these kids are academically higher than probably what you're teaching in class. Now, that doesn't mean that social emotionally that they're ready to go on to 5th grade. What it means is that academically they're ready to participate in higher levels of thinking within reading or math or science or whatever it is. But it doesn't mean that they are social emotionally ready to be 5th graders. This becomes really apparent when I was to say like a 5th grader going to 7th grade math. You'd be like, well, they're not 7th graders. They're still little. And there's a huge difference between what is academically available for kids or should be available and then what isn't. So these kids down over here, if they're on this side and you see negative standard deviations, the higher the negative is, the worse the kid did. Okay? So if you have a kid who's -3 standard deviations from the mean, they've done really poorly. That kid probably is a kid who should be in not only special education services, but could even be a self-contained classroom, depending on the kid and depending on the test. Some tests test all kids in 3rd grade. It doesn't matter if they're ELL, if they're special ed, if they're gifted, if they're Spanish speaker. It doesn't matter. They test all kids. STAR test is a little bit more particular. But when we're testing all kids, if you really test all kids on the grade level, right, to see where they actually fall, then we would have kids that are over here. Okay? But remember, what's the percentage of kids that in a standard in a normal bell curve we want to have in the middle? 68%. We're going to move this so that there's always 68%. So if you're teaching at a school and you've been working so hard, I mean, you guys are just like rocking it at the school. You got a great team. Your 4th graders are rocking it. You totally get it. And it happens that they do really well. So when they all take this test, your kids and a lot of the other kids in the state of Texas did this well. I mean, all of them, all these yellow ones are kids that did well, right? And if they were to really tell you, hey, these kids did really good, awesome job, blue ribbon school, let's make it happen, excellent, that would be great. But that's not what they do. What are they going to do? When all of the kids that you've been praying for and bringing snack for and buying oranges for and working at recess and Saturday school, and they all do well, what is the government going to do? What's your state going to do?
They're just going to shift the curve.
Good. Yes, Nydia, yes. They're just going to shift the curve. So a minute ago it was this curve, but now that they've gathered all them, everybody taking the test and blah, 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 and then everybody did really well, they're immediately going to send back results that shift the curve. And remember, remember that my mouse is gone. There it is. No, it's gone. What is happening? That when they're doing that shifting, they're then taking any kids that were not in that. So these kids who were that did really well a minute ago, now when I come in, if I could draw it again, those kids that had done really well a minute ago just did average. So we literally, and this happens on your state test too. When you take your test, they wait for 2 weeks, see however many did it, add it to the big group of people who took it before, and they say, okay, well, how did Nydia do compared to everybody else? Oh, we need to shift it. That's why a lot of you guys will miss passing your test by 1 question. You'll miss it by 1 or 2 questions, and it'll be like, oh, I missed it by 2 questions. It's meant to do that. It's meant to say, oh, okay, well, most of you fell here when you took it. Let's shift it. And so the kid that's sitting right here now is failing. A minute ago, the kid was right here. When he took the test, a minute ago, he was right here. He was in the 34%. But now that we've shifted it, he's now at the bottom. And I would say that doing that isn't a problem when you're looking for how are kids doing? What's the middle look like? Not a problem. It's a huge problem when we start attaching money to it. Cindy, did you have something to say?
No.
Okay. So, yeah. So basically, these kids here a minute ago were doing okay, actually pretty good. But now that I've shifted the curve, they're now at the bottom of this curve. Do you see it? All right. So we're always looking for this middle part. You don't have to...
Can I clarify something? I'm sorry. On that bell curve, okay, so can you go back to the other slide?
Yep.
I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get this. All right, so you're saying that if that kid is successful at that 4% and then they shift down, but isn't that more positive? Like, isn't that like that direction that you're going? Or that's where I'm confused, because we're saying like that we shifted down, but like to me, then that would be more next to the positive too. How is that a bad thing? That's what I don't understand.
Okay, so you have to imagine that if I could erase this bell curve here, I almost want to put my hand up, but it doesn't cover it. So remember, you're now just looking at the red bell curve, right? With the yellow people. You're not looking at the black and white anymore. So this little pink kid right here, when they took it originally, remember he was kind of all these yellow kids and he's the little pink kid, but you had all these yellow kids and blah, blah, blah. when I shifted it, it makes it look like I shifted it up. But it's not really that I'm shifting it up. I'm just making 68% fall in the middle for a typical curve. So it might be either way. This time, I'm shifting it up because most kids did really well. But when they did really well, my goal is not to see how well they did. My goal is to get 68% in the middle and then to see how they did. Okay? So it's not about saying, hey, all these yellow kids did really well. Your school did really good. Instead, it's about finding what is the middle. So what that means is our little pink kid here, when I did this, a minute ago, this pink kid was in the 34% that was passing. But when I shifted it, now this 34% kid, you have to kind of erase the black and white one. So now this little kiddo here is in the bottom part of the curve. So here's the curve. And if I was to draw the portions of the curve, right, I would say, oh, well, maybe I can draw the portions of the curve. It'll show my mouse. Okay, so if I was to draw those same curves, I'd say, okay, on this pink one, here's the median, our mean, right? Then we're going to draw kind of our standard deviations going down with my sad little attempt. But you kind of get the idea. So these kids here now, a minute ago they were high. Now they're not high anymore. These kids are okay. These kids get a plus. But these kids start getting minuses. But before this curve moved, this little kiddo was fine. He was fine. He was fine. Okay?
Oh.
All right. So when you're interpreting, this all sounds hard, but mostly it's just recognizing that a normal distribution, which is called your normal bell curve or a typical bell curve, it tries to find out what 68% of the kids did. They call that the middle. They're like, this is what I'm looking for, is how do kids do? The majority of kids should be scoring at third grade level if this is really a third grade test. So I move it so that most kids score in the middle. You don't need to know all these numbers here, but a couple things I do want you to think about on this particular chart. You do need to know the things that are on this one, okay? Kind of and what they mean. Here, what I want you to sort of see is this part right here where they're calling it average, above average, and below average. This word average right here is sort of important because it makes it say all of these things from this side to this side should all be important. They should all be average. But you now know that if a kid scores over here, are they average? Do we think of them as average? Like a school district. Are they going to say that kid? No. Jennifer's right. They're not. They're going to say no. Martha says it too. No, they're going to say this kid's struggling. He's failing. This kid's failing. But according to math, it's okay because it's in the middle. Because the normal distribution is not looking for who's failing. It's looking for what's typical of the third graders that are 10 years or 8 years old. What's typical of an 8-year-old third grader? Here it is. This is what's typical. But when states start attaching high stakes to it, STAKES, stakes to it, then it becomes a problem because they're only paying if you did this well over here. And if we're shifting it all the time, that's problematic. Especially if we're shifting it when everybody does really well. We shift it. Not only do we shift it, we take away money. Favorite chart. So if we look here, this is going to kind of tell you about different tests. And some of you might have even taken some of these tests, depending on how old we are. I started way back in the beginning. So the red that's here are high stakes assessments. And if I was going to say to print out 2 slides, I would print out the bell curve slide that we did at the beginning, or this one here, not all messy, and then this one here, and really know what these mean, how to talk about them, okay? So Texas high stakes assessment, like the STAR test, is your red one, okay? So it's your red one here. So what this means is around 1980, we started having our own Texas test. We didn't want to use what the nation was doing. We're better than that. We're Texas. We have a very cool shape of a state. And we believe that we are forerunners in education. And therefore, we are going to run our politics on doing better in education, helping more kids, helping teachers, providing for schools. Okay. Because who in your right mind is going to run for a government position and say, well, I want to lessen what we do for schools and hurt kids? And no, they don't. They always say they're going to make it better. And often for our legislators, that means making it harder. Harder doesn't mean better. That's not better education just because you make something hard. But instead, we end up in Texas giving tests and then changing the test. We change the test every single year. And we pay billions for it at this point. So in 1980, we first started with our own high stakes assessment. Okay, we called it the TABS, the Texas Assessment of Basic Skills. When we gave the test the first time, they were supposed to be basic skills in math and reading. Kids did horrible. Okay, they didn't do well. Basically, it showed us that like 50% of the kids don't know how to read, they don't know how to do math, and that's what went out in the newspapers. Teachers are glorified babysitters. What are we paying them for? Is this a job that they really learned in college? All those things, like bad stuff about teachers. Now, over time, the scores get better. See how they're moving up here? Now, what's causing it to move up? So we give a new test, kids did horrible. What's causing it to move upwards for the kids to all of a sudden get smarter?
The curve? Did it get moved?
Could be the curve. But I would say no, it's probably not the curve. Although that is happening.
The teachers are now teaching towards the test versus.
Yeah, they started teaching for the test.
So one thing is they start narrowing their curriculum and teaching to the test because now they know what's on the test, the kind of things. So they start teaching more in alignment with the test and scores go up. Pearson sends out people to do trainings. They give you workbooks. So Pearson, especially, is making all sorts of really great money. They start Harcourt, Pearson, Bridgeworks, Sage. These publication companies start making major money on getting worksheets, things like that, work packets out to kids, trainings for teachers. You go and you sit in trainings at Region 20 and you're just like, oh my God, it's awful. And so, but when you go back, because teachers are teaching to the test, kids seemingly are getting smarter all of a sudden. Like next year, that group of third graders is smarter than the third. In general, guys, development of learning is very progressive. Like it's going to happen no matter where the kids start. We absolutely can impact it, but it is not that one year all of a sudden kids are just smart. Like this is not that over the course of these 10 years, third graders just got way smarter. Like all of a sudden, woo, kids are smarter. No, it's that teachers got better at teaching the test and Pearson made a ton of money. Okay. Oh, thank you, Sam. So Sam's asking, what is the NAEP? Okay, so this one here, so this is Texas. I want you to see it's going click, 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 and it's getting better. Pearson's making tons of money. It seems like everything's going well. Ooh, another baby. Going well. Now, this one up here, this green line that looks fairly stable is called the NAEP test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This test is a random sample test. You're going to see my drawing ability. Okay, so here's Texas. Oh, hey, it's looking pretty good. Nope. Well, okay. It's like a gun holster or it's I don't know. Okay, so here's Texas. So for the national assessment, this works for every state. So we can take ugly states like Oklahoma that are just squares that I can do very well. So every state across the United States, they do random sampling of all sorts of different groups. Rural, urban, Hispanic serving, white, rich, farm. I mean, like they just literally randomly pick spaces to test. They'll come into a school, they test the entire school that's in that area. Sometimes it's a district, depending on how big the district is. They'll test that, but then you might not have ever been tested because they never got to you. Like your city's right here, so you never took this test. And it doesn't matter for the national assessment because all they're trying to do is, how are kids doing generally in fourth grade? How are they reading? How are they doing math? It never comes down to how's Jenny doing? How's Nydia doing? It never tells each individual kid. What it says instead is, Texas is doing this. This is what it looks like. So we don't have to test everybody. We just spot test. We random sample. When we do random sampling, we have actually started doing, the NAEP test was given way before, I'm just showing you 1980 on, but it was given in the 50s, okay, like along with Stanford Binet and intelligence tests. So it was given, but what you see is a very stable test because they test in 4th grade, in 8th grade, and in 12th grade. So because they're doing that, the next year when they test again, they're testing different 4th graders because remember, it was random sample. So they're just trying to see overall, how did 4th graders do in Texas? How did 4th graders do in Oklahoma? How they do in Florida? How are they doing in New York? How are they doing in California? And then the following year, they're like, how are they doing in California? How are they doing? And you sort of get these sort of overall summarizations of how states are doing compared to other states. 4th graders, okay? Now, when they're doing that, what you see here is that there's very little change. Now, I'm not saying this is good because kids are still in this only at the 80%. So 80% of kiddos are passing and doing well. But what it shows you is that 3rd graders or not 3rd graders, 4th graders in this case, 4th graders don't really change very much. Like ultimately 4th graders in 1980 were very similar to 4th graders now. when we see some small divots, some small drops, you'll see a little bit here, right? Kind of in here. You see a little bit here. When something drops like this, usually for the NAEP test, it has to do with something societally happening. War. We see it when we integrated. So as schools became integrated, scores dropped. So why would integration cause scores to drop? Brown versus Board. Why did it drop?
Because now you have from all like backgrounds on the same school. Like,
and why does that matter? Because they don't care. If you are special ed, they're going to test you. If you are bilingual, they're going to test you. They don't care who you are. They're just looking for fourth graders. And if you're in a fourth grade, they don't care how old you are. They don't care what race you are. They don't care what religion you are. You're taking the test. So yeah, if that's true, and we know that war or integration, as we truly start doing that, and that is actually proof that schools are not equal. Because if kids coming in and now are being tested, they weren't tested before in our migrant population, ELLs, things like that weren't being tested, then all of a sudden when they come in, we see drops at first because school was never equal. And it was never fair.
Is it true, Professor, that, and I don't know if it was maybe this class or a different one, but where they stated that Texas has a higher standard as far as like their assessments anyway. So if they did come from a different area and say they were like in the higher percentage of their testing, they could possibly fall in our lower percentage because we have a higher standard of testing overall. Is that true?
That's a really interesting question. Because my first thought is I would say yes, that's true. We do have a higher standard of testing because we change the test all the time. Because we change the test, it makes it harder every single time because we don't know what's going to be on it. It's not standardized in the same way that most tests are, which is one of the problems with it. So the NAEP test gives fourth grade test, and then the following year, somewhere else, they give the same fourth grade test. Like it's very similar. So then we can compare over time. In Texas, it's really hard to do that. And I would say other states would say it's difficult because the test is new every year. So how do you compare the apple test to the orange test? Well, they are fruits, but they are different. I asked different questions on the first test than I did the second. So yeah, I mean, my second thought is, yeah, Texas, because of the way they're messing with scores, makes it harder. Yeah, that's true.
Are there other states, like is Texas, are we the only state that does the STAR testing, or other states do the STAR as well?
We're the only ones.
Okay,
yeah,
so that's where I got
the only
that concept from.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, we're the only ones. Everybody else does the core, the common assessment. That's what they decided when President Obama was in. They all used that core assessment. But we're Texas. We like our state. So really fast. So every single time that NAEP's been given, we see some dips. When we started including special ed kids, we're going to see a small dip because it's not fair. If you end up in special ed, sometimes if you don't have a good teacher, it's not that you move faster and get back into the regular classroom. Most of the time when you end up in special ed, you're in special ed for the rest of your life. Talk about self-efficacy issues, that there's something wrong with you, that you're not good enough. So NAEP doesn't care. They test everybody. And as you add a new group into the testing, like bilingual kids, which were just added not too long ago, we test bilingual kids. They're not going to score as high. They're just learning. They're just adding English into their repertoire of language. So their L1 is Spanish, and it's not given in Spanish. We don't give it in the language. We want to see how are they doing in an English-speaking classroom in the United States. It's not to hurt anybody because it doesn't come back and say, well, you know, Jenny did really awful. She's a bilingual learner. It doesn't matter. They don't know that Jenny took the test. Jenny was just one kid who took it, and it averages out with, you know, Helen, who did amazing. And so this one remains very constant. A really good standard test is going to remain fairly constant. So if I say that and then we look at the Texas assessments, does it look like it's a very good test? Why not? What's causing it to go up? Are kids getting smarter?
No, because they just keep shifting. Shifting the scores.
Yeah.
Because they're just doing it for the money, so it goes up and down or up and down.
Yeah, so what happens here at the top, what happens here, you'll notice, these kids are getting to where the NAEP test is. They're getting to where 80% of our kids are passing it, They're ready to do it. And as soon as that happens, we get a new governor or a new mayor or a new, head of state, and they run on, we're going to make education harder, we're going to make it better, we're going to do better, and a new test comes out. And when the new test comes out, as soon as the new test comes out, scores drop. Why?
Because it's a different test. Completely.
It's a new test. Now, new tests were given over here too, like every single time. These are all new tests. But they're not new standards. They're not coming up with new things. They're just testing new. But remember, somebody got into office by saying education's going to be good, education can be great, we're going to make it harder. And so they give a harder test, and immediately the scores drop. And it goes out in the newspapers. Teachers don't know what they're doing. Nobody knows how to do math. We're way behind Asia. We've got major problems with our kids reading. And then that comes out. And so parents at home are sitting there, oh my gosh, my kid is at a bad school. My kid... No, there are bad teachers. There are no bad schools, guys. There are bad teachers, but there are not bad schools. There are great teachers at some really tough schools. So that over time, scores start going up again, which should tell you, we have a problem, because we're starting to see, if you can't see it, we have a pattern here. Mathematics always has a pattern. Always. Even as we start looking at miscues with children, individual children will have patterns. You have patterns. When you get in the shower, you know the order of operations. Some of you wash your hair first. Some of you wash your body first. Like, there is an order of operations. And if you get messed up in there somehow, like some kid comes in and is like, Mom, you're like, did I wash the conditioner out? Like, it feels like I didn't. And it's because you're so used to the same pattern of how you do it. This is the same thing, guys. When you notice patterns in mathematics, they're relevant. Okay? When you're looking at data and you find a pattern, let me say it again. If you find a pattern in data, it therefore is relevant. Okay? All right, so right here, Pearson's making a lot of money. They're sending out people to train. They're sending new books out. They're making new comments, and they're selling the test, by the way. We pay Pearson $1.7 billion to make our tests. Now, we'll get to that in just a second. So as teachers get a hold of what's on this test, they start to teach to the test, which is a bad thing. We don't like it. They do CBMs. They use old STAR tests. This would be teams. So they start getting better. As soon as they get better, somebody else runs for office. They're going to run on making education better. We want to include all kids. We want to make sure it's fair and equal. We're going to give a harder test. And guess what? They give the test. And as soon as they give the test, well, what happens? Well, they do horrible. And it goes out in the newspapers and on TV that kids can't read, nobody knows how to do math, teachers are general babysitters, teachers should be paid less, teachers. Kids. But really what it is that they're shifting the test all the time. And if they're moving the test all the time, you can never find where the criteria is. There is no criterion referenced space. All you have is what's norm. Well, what's norm is shifting. So you can't shift and then say, well, kids are good or bad based on shifting. We need something that tells us what the criteria is and then see who's above or below it. But that's not what the STAR test does. That's not what any of these tests down here have done. Teams, which was a Texas Excellence of Arts, Mathematics, and Science, English Arts, Mathematics, and Science. You'll start noticing we're using about millions of dollars here in the early 90s. By the TOS test, which some of you might have taken. I see Lisa saying, yeah, it was totally nerve-wracking. You could be a great student. It would still be scary because the teacher's like, okay, here is your test booklet. Check for your name on the top left corner. Well, mine says Jennifer. Raise your hand. Mine doesn't say Jennifer. It says Jennifer. Right? And because you're so nervous. And it's like you break the seal at the same time and you open it and it is such a scary thing. So, of course, kids do awful at it when teachers are scared, too. We're the leaders. And if we're scared, they're scared, too. Okay, so it starts getting better. Well, what's going on here? Professional development, sending out new books, making new workbooks, putting new websites, new trainings, tons of money. Who's making the money? It isn't you. It isn't me. It's Pearson and Harcourt and all the companies because they're the ones making all the stuff. So then kids start doing well. Well, somebody else comes into office and we're going to make it harder. We're going to make it better. We need school. We need education to make kids be better. Well, the truth is kids are kids, man. Like if you look at most of these assessments over time, third graders read like third graders. Most of the time, 10-year-olds read like 10-year-olds. Because remember, 68% should be like 10-year-olds. Okay. So it goes up and down and up and down. I used to, when I first started teaching at A&M before we end today, I used to say, well, we were in the midst of tax. So when I first started, it was 2008. And so I used to say, oh, guys, okay, right here, you've seen a pattern. And Wilson says, when you see a pattern, it exists. It's real. You see it, it exists. So if you see it in mathematics or you see it in MISCU, it is real. So what would you say is going to happen? Well, and they would tell me, we're going to get somebody new. And when we get somebody new, what's going to happen?
They're not going to be familiar with the test.
And what's going to happen?
They're going to change the test.
Yep.
And everything is going to go down again.
Yep. And teachers aren't going to be doing their jobs, and people aren't going to be mathematically relevant. They're not going to have cultural. I mean, kids are not good enough. Our kids are struggling. Teachers aren't doing their jobs. Why do we pay them so much? They don't know what they're doing. Guys, teachers are some of the most highly educated people in the world. A lot of us hold advanced degrees. All of us have college degrees. That's not true of any place else. A bank, places you love like HEB. Not everybody has a college degree. You have a college degree. Everybody who's teaching has a college degree. And many will carry on to have a master's degree before they retire. You are some of the most educated, smart people, and yet we're saying, well, look at this. Kids didn't do well. You're saying, yeah, but you're shifting the requirements constantly. You're constantly shifting it so that 68% is in the middle. Well, you can't tell me to meet this criteria and then shift it. It's like me saying, okay, well, I'm going to give you the final exam, but I'm not going to let you know how you did. And then I'm going to see so that 68% fall in the C range. But you're like, I want to make an A. Like if all the people make an A, why would you shift it so that most of us make a C? Well, according to a typical bell curve, I would want everything to be 68% of you make a C. So I used to say here, what's going to happen? Well, it happened. STAR test dropped. Everybody did awful. Schools started being scared of money. TEA started shutting down schools at this point, saying that, oh, well, we're going to hire new teachers, like as if that's better. Teachers who know that community, why wouldn't you train those teachers who have been there and know the kids in the community? Why would you fire them? That doesn't make any sense. Bring in teachers who don't know the community, who don't know what's happening, and put them in there, and you think they're going to be better off? Ooh, I question some of that. So they come in and, democracy prep, and they buy schools, or they become a part of a charter school network, and the goal is to get them up. Well, over time, no matter who's running the school, scores will go up. Why are they going up? More test prep, more books, more teachers going to meetings constantly, more. That's why it's going up. It's not democracy prep that's fixing it. It's that over time we get better at taking the test. So I'll argue to you that soon, because now my chart only goes to 2015, and we've seen this increasing over time. Now, we are going to see a significant drop with COVID. We're going to see it with our NAEP testing as well. Why do you think scores are going to drop? On both tests, doesn't matter.
Because parents they're not educated in this area. I mean, they don't. Some of them, like you said, don't even not knocking the language, but some don't even speak English. So how can they?
Yeah, we can have a cultural difference. Sometimes parents didn't do well in school themselves. Yeah. We have all sorts. They're working full time at home with kids from 7th grade to 3-year-olds. How do you help all of that? It's an impossible task. It's mind blowing to me what some of you are able to do. Because if you're working from home and you got 3 kids running around, 2 of them with lightsabers and 1 of them with plastic bunny rabbits, and they just need to be sitting down, and there's just no way. It's so complicated. So we're going to see a drop, just like we would in war. The pandemic is going to cause a drop in test scores. However, it will not be a statistically significant drop, meaning that we're going to just see this sort of little drop in the test scores because 3rd graders still have 3rd grade skills. They're just a little bit lower. So that's what we're going to see. But I can guarantee you on this test, guess what's going to happen? We're going to have a drop. And then all of a sudden, those of you that are going to be out clinical teaching as you come into the spring, if you're clinical teaching in the spring, and we're hoping you're back in the classroom, of course, but however it is, we're going to see a drop. And as soon as the drop happens, they're going to say, oh my God, we got to get new workbooks. We got to get new programs on our computer. We got to train teachers in a new way of doing things because obviously comprehension last year is different than comprehension now. Fluency is different than it was before. Guys, it's not any different. Kids did bad because they were missing out on the schooling that they needed, and teachers are important. Parents in the beginning of the pandemic were really realizing what teachers do with 20 children in that classroom. They were really recognizing how important to our civilization teachers were. And we can't forget that as teachers are like trying to figure out this online thing. We can't forget that we have to give teachers a little bit of grace in recognizing they're learning it and realizing, oh my gosh, they're really important. And this drop is not their fault. This drop is not your fault. Do not carry that burden on your back. It is not your cross to bear. If you are working in your classroom to use research-based things that you learned in college, because often I'll hear, I didn't learn anything in college that's helpful to me, then you must have slept through all of it, because we're not lying to you. Even your government, which often pushes the wrong idea, Texas government, they'll push things like, oh, you need to do these worksheets, or they have to be on iStation this amount of time, or like all those things. They do bad things for kids, but you get to decide in your classroom how it's done. You will give the STAR test. All of you will. Whether you like it, agree with it, or don't, whatever, you will give it. However, I don't like it either, Lisa. However, when you're giving it, how you're moving through the rest of those 180 days that you're with them, what it means to you, how you talk about that. I talked about this with my fourth graders. Like, what do you think is going to happen next? And they're like, it's going to make us look really bad. Yeah, but are you? Like, do you guys not read? And they're like, no, like we're still reading. Yeah. So sometimes the scores don't really identify where the problems are. And if they're not really identifying anything for you as a teacher, they're not helpful to you. All they do is make you feel bad, and they're at the end of the year where you can't fix it anyway. Then it's not a good test. Tests should be reliable over time. So the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP test, is an example of a formal test. It's a formal standardized assessment that doesn't change, and therefore it becomes a really good way to see how we're doing in teaching our kids to be good fourth graders or good eighth graders or good 12th graders, although we do see some more drops in 12th grade. But for Texas, all I can tell you is that it's going to drop again, and we're going to spend a butt ton of money. I don't think that I shouldn't be recording butt ton, but, you know, what are you going to do? And if you look down here, you can kind of see how out of control it's gotten. This was in 2015, $1.7 billion per year. We could give each teacher in every single classroom $5,000 to buy books and supplies in their room if we didn't give this test. Every year you walked in, you had $5,000 to make your classroom a space that the children could learn. Instead, we get armored cars to deliver tests.
Professor, I have a question with this reading and this testing and the STAR, and that comment that we just went over where it said that they don't change it, or they say the teachers are not doing their job. Is that relevant to like the reading certificate that we have to pick up as a teacher? Because I know we didn't have to before, and this year it changed. What is that? Is that for like assessment specific, or what? I don't.
Yeah, so it is. It's the Science of Teaching Reading, right? The STOR. That's going to be a section now. And the reason they've added it is this, because remember, I told you guys are doing high stakes tests too. Like if you don't pass it, you don't teach. And they change them all the time. Some of you started your EC6, then all of a sudden you were EC3 or just K8. Since I've been here, we've had K8, we've had EC6, we've had 4 to 8, and so they just change it. And then they make tests. Now, of course, I love that they're paying attention to reading, because I think a lot of teachers are afraid of phonemes and graphemes and counting them, and those things can be scary. Really, once you start using the curriculums in those early grades, you're going to follow along just fine, because it's very scripted in a lot of ways for the early phonics and phonemic awareness work. So remember, phonemic awareness is only listening. And once we start adding text, then we're adding it to phonics. So that early work that you might be afraid of is actually really important, which is what's on your test. So the 3314 class will be very beneficial to you. I hope you had a great teacher. And then in here, it's going to literally, I think someone told me on the practice test that they would say 25% were directly from questions that were on my test. Because I pulled questions from your certification test from before concerning reading, and then I changed them up to be more current. And I think it's done pretty well. And you'll be able to tell which ones are test questions from the state. And I do that so that I can then go over them with you. So that if you miss them and you see them again later on with different names or different kids, which is often what happens. They'll say, Miss Wilson's 4th grade class. That's the one I give you. But then, this. Then when you see it on the real test, it's like Miss Puente's 3rd grade bilingual class, but it's the same thing. And so you have to kind of read through the lines to say, oh, it's the same thing. It's about proximity, or it's about, chunking, onset and rhyme. So we're going to go over a lot of that vocabulary as reminders before you go test, because a lot of you are going to be testing this semester, I think. Or starting your practice tests anyway. And I'd like for you all to pass the reading section, like more than anything. So if you're not doing that, I don't feel like I'm doing my job, because the reading test should make you feel like, oh, we went over that. We went over that. I remember that. Oh, 6-syllable types, I have to know them all? Like, really? It's not going to be as hard as 6-syllable types, but you are going to have to know morphemes, graphemes, phonemes, and we'll go over all that stuff. We'll be working on it. Good question. So $1.7 billion a year might be a little much, guys. All right. So I know some of you are running off to another class. Some of you already have. If you'll kind of take a look at the finishing of this PowerPoint, right, kind of go through the rest of it on your own, taking a look at things. Here's NAEP again. And what I did in this particular one was just pull 4th grade. But because you see it here, and you should notice, hey, this is fairly straight. If anything you see is fairly straight across with not huge changes, you can say this is a fairly reliable test. You don't know until you get into it if it's totally reliable. But upon glance, you would say whatever this test is fairly reliable. Because my 3rd graders look like other 3rd graders. As you kind of go through, these are some of the examples of formal assessments. I do want you to recognize that there are 3 types of formal assessments. The first one is norm reference. That's the bell curve. So if you hear norm reference, it's a bell curve. They're going to give you numbers and standard deviations. So if somebody says, Kathy is 1 standard deviation from the mean, what type of test did Kathy take? She took a norm referenced exam. Okay, anytime there's anything to do with a bell curve, think norm referenced. What's normal, typical, the middle, 68%? What is 68%? How are you doing compared to the middle? Okay. Criterion reference tests, which are much better, but they set a criteria, and then they see, are the kids above it or below it? So if we say this is 3rd grade, how did Jenny do? We say Jenny either met the mark, she went above the criteria, or she went below, she failed. But the criteria doesn't move. It stays the same. Okay, we don't shift it. It stays the same. It initially sounds like the STAR test is a criterion reference test. It's not. It's not, because they're looking for what's in the middle and they're shifting. But they make it sound like, no, everybody can make an A. Just get your kids going. Everybody can do it. No, if everybody did it, they would shift it so that everybody is 68%. So now those kids where everybody did it at your school is now in the 68%. Therefore, it is not criterion referenced. In a criterion referenced exam, all of your kids could pass. And you'd be like, yay, they all met the 80%, or they all met the 70%, whatever it is. Okay? The last kind of formal assessment is a diagnostic test. And that's just what it sounds like when you go to the doctor, they diagnose something. So a diagnostic test in reading is taking a look at how the kids' oral language, speaking, listening, reading, and writing are doing compared to others. Like what might be wrong or what might be going right. A diagnostic test can also look at gifted and talented. Could be a kind of diagnostic test. So these are looking at sometimes even a diagnosis, just like with you've got like eye exams, which is the first way that we start with dyslexic kids. We're going to test their eyes, right? We're going to see how their sight is. This is why a lot of kids end up in glasses in 2nd grade, but they didn't have them in kinder, because it's not till 2nd grade that they know their letters and can actually do an eye test fairly readily. They end up with glasses. So that would be an example of a diagnostic test. Okay, we're going to diagnose something. Yes, Diana. I love it. She raised a hand. Badass. We don't hear you.
The diagnostic test is something like the TELPAS test they do every year?
Yeah. Now, I will say that the TELPAS test also lends itself to a norm reference test because they're looking for what the norm is for those, those passing, but they don't shift it in the same ways. So, yeah. If you're diagnosing how close into their L2 and L1 it is, yeah. I think actually the Woodcock one, the one that's down here, the Woodcock, this reading one here is one that's used a lot to diagnose dyslexia. And when you're talking about the TELPAS, that's very similar to a reading scale test because they're just seeing how you're doing in terms of your L1 and L2. I don't know. It's still a high stakes test, so if they don't do well in their TELPAS, they can end up, having, having intervention that doesn't really match them very well. Culturally, it's just not very appropriate.
For the diagnostic test, like as a reading teacher, how would you know? Because I know I've looked at some of the assessments before and I haven't done well, and so I'm just thinking, like, as far as diagnostic, if you were to test for like dyslexia, because it says dyslexia and dysgraphia, like how would a teacher know? Like, they have to recommend that the child get tested for the diagnostician, but if the child, like, say, can the teacher wrongfully reference them? Like, if the teacher circles, oh, I think he needs to be tested for dyslexia, but the child doesn't see the numbers moving around, maybe it's like a form of dysgraphia. Does that look bad on the teacher for not circling both or circling dysgraphia? Like,
put your big girl panties on. Absolutely not. If you think you've got something going on with a kid, get them in. We're going to, towards the end of the semester, I'm going to look at dyslexia with you and specifically show you that, hey, here's some things to use as a teacher, like, are kids doing this? And if you notice a kid who's doing most of these things, 8 out of 10 things, one of them is switching letters, but it's only one. There's lots of other things that you'll notice with a kid who's dyslexic, things like organization being a problem. Big. A dyslexic kid often struggles to understand how organization works, right? So we're going to look at what that is. And so you as a teacher can say, hey, I need to put this kid up. This is why. Here's the 8 things that the kid is doing. I'd just like to find out. In the middle of that, a diagnostician is also going to contact you and say, hey, can you keep notes on this, this, and this? She's responsible for saying the kid is dyslexic, but you shouldn't feel bad. If you're seeing 8 out of 10 things, you need to have the kid tested. Because if it's not dyslexia, it might be something else. We certainly know that they're struggling in reading and that general teaching isn't working.
Is omitting, because I know we talked about this last time, omitting, like, say a letter, and if I write the word like French fry and the kid leaves out like one E and one Y, and they're writing it like the way they hear it or say it in their own mind, isn't that dysgraphia?
No, it's just normal. No, it can be. Most of the time, dysgraphia and dyslexia are comorbid, meaning they come together. So if you find a kid who's dyslexic, oftentimes they have dysgraphic tendencies, whether they've been labeled that or not. Some schools label dysgraphia, some don't. Some take a lot harder to get dysgraphia. And I'll tell you, in general, they're comorbid. They come together. So a kid who's struggling with letters and sounds in reading is going to struggle with letters and sounds in their writing. Writing can be particularly hard for dysgraphic kids, labeled or not, because we don't give them enough time to do writing. And writing for a dysgraphic kid is a complicated task because they're listening in their mind to what they think they hear, trying to put the letters down. And so, we don't give enough time to writing. And so then we end up with kids in middle school that haven't written more than half a page, or kids who look in 4th grade like they're in 1st grade with their handwriting and their ability to do it. So we can label it dysgraphia, but I would also argue that it could be just that they haven't had enough experience using it. If they're only doing spelling tests, but they're not doing real writing, they're not going to be very good at real writing. And they're going to tell you things like, I don't know what to write about. How do you spell barn, miss? Stuff like that. Right. And that's just because they haven't had enough experience spelling it. I always think of my...
skipped a step.
Right? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
perfect.
That's what I was... So because if they have dysgraphia, that doesn't mean they automatically have dyslexia. They could just have one or the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Although if you find a kid who's dysgraphic, there's a high likelihood that they are dyslexic. Even if they're not doing all the things, they've developed strategies to overcome it. They still have it. It often goes together, but it doesn't have to. No. And you will find, 1 in 1,000 kids who are just dysgraphic and writing is awful. Easiest thing to do, get them on a keyboard. Get them on a keyboard, have them working it that way and seeing the little underscores that it's spelled wrong so that they can learn how to use spell check and actually be effective. Because otherwise writing becomes so arduous for a kid with dysgraphia. They just don't want to do it. And as a parent, as a teacher, it's like ripping your hair out. And you don't want to make writing not fun, but they have to write. And so get them on a keyboard.
Okay, thank you.
All right, guys, I know we've kind of had a longer night tonight. I think this is always how it goes. I'll try to be faster next time, but I can't guarantee anything. Whenever you need to leave, you go. just go. I'm so happy that you guys are here. Those of you that have stayed, it makes me like so thrilled that you're coming. I want you to know that I won't be doing office hours tomorrow, but if you have any questions, please put them up in Blackboard. I will have office hours the following week, no problem. And if you need better office hours than Friday, like I'm not even sure that's going to work for me very well. It does it this week. Then just let me know so that I can like come in here and hang out with you and we can talk about stuff, or I can give you my phone number and we can FaceTime. I know not much stuff is due yet, but if you have something that's really fast, like a really fast question, those of you that are here, I'm going to give you a specialty, and that is what my phone number is. So I'm going to first stop the recorder.